Water, a giver of life, but also a destroyer. In every corner of the earth, ancient people passed down a nearly identical story. A story about a time when the skies opened, when the oceans rose, when the world was washed clean. A story of a flood. Why do cultures separated by oceans, centuries and languages all seem to share the same chilling memory? Did they just imagine it? Or were they remembering something real? Let's begin by looking at some examples of where in human history the story of a flood surfaced. Let's start where writing itself began, Mesopotamia. In the Sumerian city of Uruk, over 4,000 years ago, scribes carved into clay the first known flood myth, the story of Utnapishtim, the man chosen by the gods. The gods, angry at mankind's noise and corruption, decide to send a flood. One god, Enki, secretly warns Utnapishtim, telling him to build a boat. He loads it with animals, his family and seeds of life. The flood comes. All life outside the boat is destroyed. When the waters finally recede, Utnapishtim releases birds to find land. Sound familiar? Because this is thousands of years older than the story of Noah, and nearly identical. In the book of Genesis, the God of Israel warns Noah. He builds an ark, he takes animals, his family, and floats above the chaos. But what's striking is not just the similarity, it's the detail, the duration of the flood, the birds sent out, the mountain where the ark rests. These aren't random, they resemble older tales. You'd be surprised how many of the stories exist. In Vedic texts from India, some over 3,000 years old, there's a story of Manu, the first man. While washing his hands in a river, he saves a small fish. But this is no ordinary fish. It's Matsya, an avatar of the god Vishnu. The fish warns Manu of a coming flood that will drown the world. Manu builds a boat, ties it to a mountaintop, and survives while everything else is destroyed. When the waters recede, he begins a new human race. Another flood, another survivor, another restart. What if these aren't just myths? What if they're distorted memories of a very real event? Not just one flood, but many, sudden, violent, global. Today we will be uncovering what might have happened around 12,000 years ago. Wherever you're listening from, get a blanket, make yourself comfortable, let the world outside fade for a while. With this video, the visuals are here to provide context, but they're not required to enjoy the stories. So feel free to close your eyes if you want. Just listen, and let's begin. In ancient Greece, the myth takes a familiar turn. Zeus, angered by humanity's wickedness, unleashes a flood. But the god Prometheus warns his mortal son Deucalion to build a chest, a primitive boat. With his wife Pyrrha, they drift for days until they land on Mount Parnassus. The gods tell them to repopulate the earth by tossing stones over their shoulders, stones that turn into men and women. Strange symbolism. But once again, a flood, a survivor, a mountaintop. Travel across the ocean, and the flood myth still lives. The Hopi of the American Southwest tell of the third world destroyed by a great flood, brought upon by mankind's disobedience. The people escape underground and emerge into the current, fourth world. The Ojibwe of the Great Lakes tell of a flooded earth where only a few animals survive by clinging to a raft. The muskrat dives deep into the water, bringing up mud that the great turtle uses to recreate land. It's eerily familiar and yet uniquely local. In ancient China, the world was nearly destroyed by a terrible flood. The hero Yu the Great is said to have laboured for decades, taming the waters using canals and dikes, not stopping it, but redirecting it. He succeeded and was made emperor. This wasn't just myth. The story of Yu's flood was once dismissed by scholars until evidence of massive floods around 1900 BCE near the Yellow River emerged. Was Yu the Great real? In Mayan mythology, the gods create humans multiple times. The third version, humans made of wood, angered the gods, so they sent rain and floods to wash them away. Only a few survived. The Aztecs also speak of previous worlds destroyed by catastrophe, one of them by water. Their fifth son, the world we live in today, stands on the wreckage of 4 previous ages, flood after flood after flood. Across the scattered islands of Polynesia, flood myths take on epic proportions. In Hawaii, God sent torrential rains to drown the earth, sparing only those who climbed the highest mountains. In Samoa and Fiji, legends tell of entire lands once above water, now sunken beneath the ocean. Some even speak of lands that breathed, moving with the tides until they were swallowed completely. Could they be remembering real lands lost to rising seas after the Ice Age? Among Australia's Aboriginal peoples, the stories go even deeper into geological time. They speak of coastlines that existed before the sea came in, of rivers that no longer flow, of land that now lies beneath the waves. And here's the twist. Modern science has confirmed that these stories match real sea level rises from over 10,000 years ago, passed down orally across 400 generations. They didn't write it down, but they remembered. Mesopotamia, Greece, India, China, the Americas, the Pacific, Australia. The details change, the names are different, but the story is the same, and always there's something familiar. A divine warning, a lone survivor, a boat, a mountaintop, and the world reset. High on a hill in southeastern Turkey, buried for thousands of years beneath layers of earth, stands a place that shouldn't exist. Göbekli Tepe, a ring of massive stone pillars, carved with strange animals and symbols, some weighing over 10 tons, and they were built over 11,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, before agriculture, or so we thought. Mainstream archaeology calls it the world's oldest temple, but there's a mystery. Who built it? How did they move and arrange these stones with such precision? Thousands of years before the Egyptian pyramids or Stonehenge. And more importantly, why was it buried intentionally and then forgotten? Some researchers believe it was an act of preservation, as if the builders knew something terrible was coming, something that would wipe their world away. A flood, a fire, a memory buried beneath the soil. Thousands of miles away, off the coast of modern-day India, divers discovered what appears to be the ruins of another ancient city, now submerged under 120 feet of water. Rectangular foundations, stone roads, even signs of a complex drainage system. Some geologists estimate the site could be 9,000 years old, or even older. Narrator softens, leans into mystery. That would mean it predates every known civilization we've ever studied by thousands of years. And just like Göbekli Tepe, its existence raises a question many archaeologists are afraid to ask out loud. Were humans advanced long before we thought? Then there's Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan. To some, it's a natural formation. To others, it's a stepped pyramid lost to the sea. Sharp angles, flat terraces, stair-like ledges carved deep into the stone. If man-made, it could be over 10,000 years old. Again, built during a time when humans were supposedly still hunter-gatherers. And here's what ties it all together. At the end of the last ice age, as the glaciers melted, the sea rose, fast. Coastlines shifted, islands vanished, entire habitats disappeared. If a civilization had developed near the shore, like almost every civilization in human history, it would now be deep underwater and forgotten. Unless pieces of it still survive, in hidden ruins, in half-decayed carvings, in flood myths, retold across thousands of years. We used to think history moved in a straight line, from simple to complex, from scattered tribes to great cities. But what if it didn't? What if it moved in cycles? Civilization, collapse, flood, rebirth. A memory carried forward only through story and stone. And maybe, just maybe, the reason the people of Göbekli Tepe built their temple wasn't just to worship the gods. Maybe it was to remember, to record something they couldn't afford to forget. All across the world, from ancient cave walls to crumbling temples, we find signs that humanity has walked this path before. The difference is, we forgot the last time. But now, layer by layer, story by story, we're remembering. And if we really did inherit the ruins of a forgotten world, what else might have survived? Could ancient knowledge about the stars, the earth, or even technology have been passed down? What if ancient people knew more than we think? Not just myths and rituals, but knowledge. Deep, precise, almost impossible knowledge. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis drew a map using sources he claimed were very ancient. It accurately shows the eastern coast of South America, but then, at the bottom, a landmass, a shape where Antarctica would be. Not covered in ice, just land, mountains, bays and rivers. Antarctica wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years, and even then, its interior would remain hidden beneath ice until the 20th century. So how did ancient sources know what was there? Some say the Piri Reis map is a coincidence. Others suggest it was compiled from even older sea charts, ones that survived the last great flood. If a civilization had mapped the world before the glaciers melted, that map would show Antarctica as it once was, ice-free. And that would place the knowledge not 500 years old, but 10,000 years old, or more. And it's not just maps. Let's look at the stars. The pyramids of Giza aren't just tombs. They're aligned, precisely. Each pyramid placed to mimic the stars of Orion's belt. It's not just the shape. It's the angles, the spacing, the orientation to true north. All of it matches the sky, but not today's sky. The alignment only works 12,000 years ago, around 10,500 BCE, before history began, before civilization officially existed. Why build 3 massive stone pyramids to match a star pattern from a forgotten time? Who knew the stars well enough and built monuments large enough to preserve that knowledge across millennia? Half a world away, Angkor Wat, a vast temple complex in Cambodia. It doesn't just face east to greet the rising sun. Its towers also align with the constellation Draco, the celestial dragon. Again, the match isn't symbolic, it's mathematical, intentional. And the star alignment corresponds not to today's sky, but to how the heavens looked, thousands of years before Angkor Wat was supposedly built. Now, here's where it becomes unsettling. When you draw a line around the Earth, a perfect great circle, you find a chain of ancient sites sitting on or near it. Giza, Petra, Mohenjo-Daro, Easter Island, Machu Picchu, Nazca, Angkor Wat, and even remote megalithic ruins in West Africa. Perfectly aligned, as if they were chosen or remembered on purpose. No one can fully explain why or how. Some call it coincidence. Others wonder if it's evidence of a global surveying system, a memory of the Earth that someone once understood, far before we did. Who were these people? How did they measure with such accuracy? What were they trying to preserve? And if the sky was so important to them, if they built their cities and temples to mirror the stars, what were they watching for? A return? A warning? A cycle? The deeper we look into the past, the more it feels like something is missing. Pieces of a story left behind in stone, but scattered, just enough to confuse, just enough to make us wonder. What if all these alignments and these impossible maps and monuments are not just relics? What if they're reminders, not just of where we came from, but of what we've already forgotten? We're talking about pirates, not the charming movie kind with perfect teeth and witty comebacks. I mean real pirates, the ones who smelled like seawater, sweat, and bad decisions. So, What was it actually like to live aboard a pirate ship? What did you eat? How did you survive? And more importantly, why would most of us tap out before lunch? Okay, you've woken up, not in a soft bed, not in a cozy hammock strung between palm trees. Number. You've woken up to the unmistakable stench of 150 unwashed men, dried fish, vomit, and the haunting scent of something that died weeks ago and never left. The sun's not even up yet, but the hold is already a swamp of body heat and regret. You slept in your clothes because pirates don't own pyjamas, and even if they did, they'd just get stolen. Your shirt is stuck to your back. Your hair is a rat's nest soaked in salt, sweat, and questionable life decisions. And your first thought of the day is, why does my mouth taste like cannon smoke and old rum? No toothpaste, no toothbrush, no minty fresh anything. You rinse your mouth with watered down grog and pretend that counts. Now, getting up, that's its own sport. Because the moment you try to stretch, you bang your head on the low wooden ceiling, kick someone else's peg leg, and narrowly avoid stepping on a rat that's somehow fatter than the ship's cook. Congratulations, you're awake. Time for work. Except you're not walking into an office. You're climbing into chaos. You haul yourself up to the deck, half blind from the sun, and already nursing a crick in your neck that feels like it was inflicted by Neptune himself. And what greets you? A crew of the loudest, smelliest, most creatively vulgar men ever assembled. Half of them are hungover. The other half are still drunk. Someone's already puking off the side. Another guy is singing sea shanties at full volume, off-key, while holding a sword, naked. You're greeted by your quartermaster who hates you, barking orders in a voice that sounds like gravel being chewed by a demon. Rig the sails, swab the deck, scrape the barnacles off the hull before they start charging rent. You haven't even eaten. And speaking of food, breakfast. If you're lucky, it's salted beef so old it's legally considered a fossil, or hardtack, a biscuit so hard it can and has broken teeth. If you're unlucky, you get weevils in your biscuit. If you're really unlucky, you get a biscuit in your weevils. Protein. And don't you dare complain, because the cook will hear you. And this man once stabbed someone with a fishbone for saying his soup was a little watery. Now, back to work. You're climbing masts, tying ropes, scrubbing decks, all while being blasted with ocean spray, sunburned into jerky, and dodging flying seagull poop like it's a sniper. Every step is slippery, every rope is frayed, and everything smells like the ocean got into a bar fight and lost. You think pirates just sailed around, drank rum and sang songs? Wrong. You're fixing sails in a storm. You're patching holes in a ship that's more woodworm than wood. You're praying to sea gods you don't even believe in because a storm cloud just blinked at you. You haven't bathed in 3 weeks. Your clothes are salt stiff. Your socks are a science experiment. And your boots? Filled with seawater, toe blisters and regret. Oh, and that romantic idea of freedom? Sure, you're free. Free to get scurvy. Free to catch lice. Free to lose your leg to an infected splinter and have it amputated by the ship's surgeon. A guy whose only qualification is once watched someone else do it. But you've got treasure, right? Gold? Jewels? Riches beyond imagination? Nope. You're being paid in shares, and your share is currently being held hostage by the captain because you looked at him funny. Also, there's a bounty on your head in 3 different countries, 2 of which you've never even been to. How? Because pirate bureaucracy makes no sense. You want to quit? Too bad. There's nowhere to go. You're in the middle of the ocean, no lifeboats, no escape, no HR department. Just you, your new best friend named Stabby Pete, and a never-ending cycle of wet socks, rotten food, and existential crises brought on by the sound of the sea whispering, "You did this to yourself." And this is just morning. You haven't even had your first cannon fight yet. Welcome to pirate life. You wouldn't last a day. All right. So you've survived the wake-up call, which was really just a combination of blinding sunlight, suspicious smells, and being shouted at by a man with 3 teeth and a deep hatred of mornings. Now it's time to eat, or at least try. Because food on a pirate ship wasn't so much meals, as it was a daily gamble between mild disgust and this might actually kill me. Let's start with the basics. You get hardtack, which is a biscuit in the same way that a brick is a pillow. It's flour, water and lies, baked until it's roughly the density of a neutron star. You can't bite into it without risking dental reconstruction, so the trick is to soak it in grog or soup until it's soft enough to stop breaking teeth. But you know what else likes hardtack? Weevils, little beetle things that live inside the biscuit. You try not to look too closely because if it's moving, well, that's just extra protein. Some pirates would eat in the dark so they didn't have to watch their breakfast crawl. Now, on special days, and by special, I mean someone hasn't died this week, you might get salted meat. Sounds good, right? Until you realise this meat's been sitting in a barrel for months, soaking in brine until it's turned into salty leather with the flavour of regret and barnacle runoff. You don't chew it, you negotiate with it. Like, please, just break down in my mouth before I die of exhaustion. And then there's the dried peas, not fresh peas, not nice green plump peas, dried. So dry they make sand look hydrated. They get boiled into a mushy, greyish paste that smells like disappointment, and tastes like it too. Soup was common, and by soup I mean mystery sludge. Everything went in, rat bones, old vegetables, that one fish someone dropped on the deck yesterday. You didn't ask what was in it. You just hoped it didn't scream when you poked it. Now, if your ship's cook was creative, you might get some bizarre dishes. Pickled seaweed, fermented fish guts. Once, on a particularly desperate voyage, a crew reportedly made stew out of old leather belts. Boiled them, ate them, probably gave them a nostalgic chew toy texture. And let's not forget the rum. Ah yes, the pirate classic. Except you didn't just drink rum, you lived on it. Why? Because water went bad. After a week in the barrel, water turned green, grew slime and developed personality. So you drank grog, a mix of rum and water, or if your captain hated you, vinegar and water. Because nothing says refreshing beverage like sipping salad dressing in 40-degree heat. Scurvy? Absolutely. You'd be lucky to see a single piece of fruit in 6 months. If someone brought a lemon on board, it was basically a religious relic, a sacred orb of citrusy salvation. And just in case this isn't grim enough, the food was rationed. Small portions twice a day, with the consistency of gravel and the nutritional value of soggy cardboard wrapped in salt. If you got caught stealing extra rations, you'd be whipped. If you got caught hoarding food, you'd be flogged. If you got caught complaining about the food, you'd be handed more food and told to shut up, or tossed overboard, depending on how annoying you were. And yet, somehow, the cook, the man responsible for this daily digestive trauma, was untouchable. You didn't mess with him, because he controlled the knives, and he knew how to make a man disappear into a pot of soup so fast it would make your head spin. So what did you eat as a pirate? Whatever hadn't rotted yet, whatever hadn't grown eyes, and whatever the cook didn't throw at you for asking dumb questions. What did you wish you could eat? Literally anything else. A fresh apple, a warm loaf of bread, a piece of meat that wasn't 40% salt and 60% despair, but you don't get those things. Because you're a pirate. You don't eat to enjoy, you eat to survive. And if you survive long enough, maybe, just maybe, one day you'll get your hands on a slice of lemon. And when you do, it'll taste like heaven dipped in sunshine, assuming you still have enough teeth to bite it. All right, you've woken up in a floating stink box. You've gnawed through breakfast like a desperate raccoon. Now it's time to get to work. Because piracy, spoiler alert, it's not just dramatic sword fights and treasure maps drawn by guys with suspicious eye injuries. Number, it's work. And not the kind where you sit in a cubicle and steal office pens. The kind where you sweat through your clothes, bleed into your socks, and maybe lose a finger before lunch. Let's say you're not the captain. Because of course you're not. You're you. You're the guy who joined the crew thinking, "Yeah, this'll be fun." And now you're realising it's mostly just blisters and yelling. Your day begins with ship duties, which is a cute phrase that means Every horrible thing that keeps this creaking coffin from sinking. You're scrubbing the deck, which sounds simple until you realise it's covered in old blood, fish guts, spilled grog, and at least 3 bodily fluids you'd rather not identify. You're using seawater, no soap, no gloves, just a brush and a prayer. Then it's sail work. Climbing up the rigging, sometimes 60 feet in the air, with wind screaming in your ears and the constant threat of falling to your death or getting clocked by a swinging yard arm. And here's the best part. You're doing all this on a moving ship, with the ocean trying to body slam you off the mast like Poseidon's in a bad mood. Still alive? Great. Now you're coiling ropes. South many. Ropes. Ropes for sails. Ropes for anchors. Ropes for tying up prisoners. Ropes for tying up you if you screw up enough times. After that, maintenance. You're fixing sails, patching leaks, hammering planks, oiling cannons, and occasionally chasing a rat with a knife because it ate your last crumb of hardtack. You don't sit down. You don't rest. If your hands aren't bleeding, you're probably slacking. And when combat happens, you're running a cannon crew, which means you're lifting 30-pound cannonballs, ramming them into the barrel, pouring in gunpowder, lighting fuses, and then immediately going half deaf as your ears ring like a dinner bell in hell. All while the ship rocks beneath you and enemy fire whistles past your head. Reload. Fire. Repeat. Hope you don't explode. Hope you don't catch fire. Hope your crewmate doesn't drop a lit match into the powder keg because he's had too much grog and forgot how fire works. When there's no fighting, you're still busy. You might be manning the helm, swabbing the deck again, gutting fish, polishing weapons, or, if you're really unlucky, on latrine duty, which is exactly what it sounds like. And it involves a bucket, in the open ocean, with splashback. On rare days, you might go ashore. Time to resupply, get water, trade for goods, repair the ship. Which again sounds fun, until you realise that you're carrying heavy barrels through jungle mud while also watching for snakes, bandits and hostile locals who are absolutely sick of pirates showing up and wrecking their villages. And heaven forbid you make a mistake. You drop something overboard, you're diving in, you fall asleep on watch. That's a flogging. You sass the quartermaster. That's a backhand and a week on half rations. Now maybe you're thinking, but what about the loot? What about counting gold and drinking from jewel-encrusted goblets? Okay, if you actually managed to take a ship, which wasn't exactly easy, you might spend a day hauling goods, stacking coins, splitting shares, and trying to hide your cut from the guy next to you, who would 100% stab you for half a sandwich. And if there wasn't gold, then congratulations. You just risked your life for a crate of dried fish and someone's laundry. So, yeah. The pirate workday wasn't a romantic adventure full of treasure chests and cheeky parrots. It was a brutal, endless grind on a wet wooden prison, full of aggressive men with itchy trigger fingers and no concept of dental hygiene. There were no weekends, no unions, no health plans, just work. Sunrise to sunset, over and over, until you died in battle, drowned in a storm, or got promoted to cook and finally got to stop cleaning rat blood off the deck. You know, the dream. Now let's talk about something truly horrifying. Hygiene, health, and all the creative, disgusting, absurdly casual ways you could die on a pirate ship. Because listen, if you're imagining tropical breezes and a splash of seawater to the face like some kind of nautical spa day, stop. You're not sailing the Caribbean on a luxury cruise. You're trapped on a filth raft. Let's begin with the basics. Bathing. Did pirates bathe? Sure. If falling overboard and flailing in salt water counts as a bath, there were no showers, no soap, no towels. Maybe you wiped your face with your shirt, which hasn't been washed since last monsoon season. The only time you smelled better was when you stood downwind from someone who smelled worse, which, to be fair, was everyone. Teeth? Gone. No toothbrushes. No dentists. Your daily dental care was chewing on stale biscuit and occasionally picking splinters out of your gums with a rusty knife. You had cavities that could house a small bird. Your breath could curdle milk. By the age of 30, most pirates had maybe 6 teeth left, and none of them were in a good mood. Injuries? Oh, you'll have those. You smashed your finger in a cannon hatch. You slipped and cracked your head on the deck. You got cut hauling ropes or stabbed during a drunken argument about who stole the last lime. Tough luck, mate, because your doctor was a guy named Stumpy Bill, whose only qualification was that he'd survived smallpox twice. Treatment options included Pouring rum on it, tying it with string amputation with a rusty saw and a stick to bite down on. That's it. That's the whole pirate medical handbook. Bleeding? Cauterize it. Fever? Sweat it out. Missing a leg? Strap on a table leg and call it a day. And speaking of legs, gangrene. You've heard the word. It's when your flesh says, I'm done, turns black and starts falling off. One infected cut could turn into full-blown limb rot in days, and with no antibiotics, you were just meat slowly going bad in the sun. Now let's talk disease, because nothing says adventure on the high seas like scurvy. That's what you get when you don't eat fruits or vegetables. Your gums swell, your teeth fall out, your skin bruises if someone looks at you wrong, and eventually you just shut down. Like a poorly maintained laptop. Then there's dysentery, which is pirate code for you're going to poop yourself to death. You get it from drinking contaminated water, which, surprise, is the only water you have. And the ship doesn't have toilets. It has buckets, which overflow, which mix with the drinking barrels when the waves get choppy, which means congratulations, you now live inside a blender of human misery. Also fun. Typhus, tuberculosis, syphilis, malaria, trench foot, and the occasional outbreak of plague, because why not? And don't forget injury by stupidity. A cannon misfire, a falling mast, a crewmate who thought he was funny and threw a knife a little too close to your face. One wrong step and you fall overboard. And guess what? No one's turning the ship around for you. You're now fish food with commitment issues. Sharks? Oh yeah. They followed pirate ships. Why? Because you're constantly throwing over scraps, blood, sewage, and, occasionally, crewmates. Jump into that water and you've got seconds before something toothy decides to test your flavour. And then there's execution. Mutiny? You get hanged. Steal from the crew? Hanged. Fall asleep on watch? Maybe flogged, maybe hanged, maybe both. Depends on how cranky the captain is. In short, your pirate health plan consisted of rum screaming a peg leg and an unshakable belief that death is just part of the lifestyle. So if you're thinking of running away to sea because pirates are cool, just remember, by the time you've puked up your third helping of wormy biscuit and caught your second mystery rash, you'll be begging to go back to your boring desk job and your toothpaste. Because on a pirate ship, the only thing more consistent than the waves is the constant aggressive attempt on your life by bacteria, bad luck, and Bob the crewman who really hates your face. So now, finally, you ask, how did pirates have fun? Because surely there must have been some reason people kept signing up to live in a floating disease coffin of salt and rage, right? Well, yeah, there was fun. Unhinged, dangerous, often very drunken fun. Let's start with the obvious, rum. The pirate solution to thirst, heartbreak, boredom, toothache, betrayal, scurvy, and occasionally cleaning wounds. Rum was the universal lubricant of pirate joy. Didn't matter if it was your birthday, your captain just died, or the ship ran out of oranges, the answer was rum. And not the nice kind. This wasn't craft-distilled coconut blossom artisanal sipping rum. This was someone found a barrel in a dockside alley and it hasn't stopped smoking rum. You drank it straight, you drank it warm, you drank it with stuff floating in it. You drank it until you forgot how awful your life was, then woke up face down in a pile of cannonballs wondering who tattooed a shark on your neck. And when the rum ran low, panic. Pirates would mutiny over rum. They'd attack other ships just for alcohol. You think they were raiding treasure fleets for gold? Number. They were hunting for floating pubs. Now when pirates weren't drinking themselves into oblivion, they were gambling. Dice, cards, coin flipping, who can spit the farthest? If it involved luck and someone losing their shirt, pirates were doing it. Problem was, pirates were terrible losers. Imagine losing 3 silver coins and a chicken over a bad dice roll, and then realising the guy who beat you was your bunkmate with a twitchy eye and a fondness for knives. Fights broke out constantly. Teeth were lost. Occasionally so were fingers. And if you didn't like gambling, well then, maybe you were into music. Yes, pirates had music, but not like sweet sea shanties with harmonised vocals and fiddles. We're talking one guy with half a lute, another banging a barrel like a drum, and someone else singing a song they half remembered from a tavern in Lisbon. Lyrics were improvised, instruments were improvised. Occasionally the lyrics were the instruments, if the person singing had enough missing teeth to make whistling noises while they talked. And pirates danced, not ballroom, more like, I'm very drunk and trying to shake the rats out of my pants kind of dancing. You'd see 6 guys stomping around in a circle, while one guy played a harmonica with his nose and everyone else clapped out of rhythm. Games. Oh, there were games. Kick the rat. Balance the knife on your finger while the ship is rocking. See how long you can hold your breath in the gunpowder barrel. Pirates invented boredom sports centuries before Red Bull existed. And then there were activities. Tattooing each other with soot and sharp bones, carving strange symbols into the deck, putting on puppet shows using spoons, socks and leftover crab legs. Yes, actual pirate puppet shows. Nothing passes the time quite like watching a crusty man with one eye do a high-pitched voice for Lady Governor McBiscuit in a love triangle with a wooden spoon. Some ships even had pet parrots, or monkeys, or cats that absolutely did not sign up for this and spent most of their lives avoiding being accidentally eaten. And then, when things got truly exciting, there were shore leaves. Ah yes, the legendary moment when the crew was allowed to go ashore and absolutely destroy the local economy. Booze, brothels, bad decisions. Pirates on shore were chaos in human form. By the time they got back to the ship, half of them had new scars, new diseases, and new stories they couldn't tell without being immediately arrested. And despite all of this, despite the smell, the blood, the infections, the teeth that ran away in fear, pirates still laughed. They told stories. They sang terrible songs in worse voices. They danced like nobody was watching, mostly because the only people watching were just as drunk. Because when your life is one gust of wind away from oblivion, you don't take things seriously. You have fun. Loud, weird, chaotic fun. The kind of fun that makes you forget you're sleeping next to a cannon and your socks are mouldier than blue cheese. And if you're thinking, hey, that actually doesn't sound too bad, well, try doing it while covered in your own sweat, sharing a hammock with a guy named Toothless Jack who sings in his sleep and thinks hygiene is a government conspiracy. Then we'll talk, yes, love, romance, human connection, all those soft, fluttery emotions you might hope to enjoy at some point in your life. But you're a pirate now, and spoiler alert, your love life is going to suck. First of all, let's state the obvious. You live on a floating garbage can with 70 other sweaty, violent men who haven't bathed in weeks. Your bed is a damp hammock. Your cologne is odor, mildew and despair. And your idea of a date night is not getting stabbed over the last spoonful of salted fish. So where do pirates find women? Short answer, they didn't. Longer answer, they might stumble across women during brief moments of shore leave. And even then, let's just say it wasn't exactly candlelit dinners and walks on the beach. Pirate romance happened in 3 tragic flavours. 1. Portside passion, aka, you have 5 hours and some coins. This was the most common type of pirate romance. You dock in some shady port town, get wildly drunk and stumble into whatever local establishment is offering companionship in exchange for gold teeth, rum, or that weird coin you stole off a cursed skeleton 3 weeks ago. These weren't love stories. These were transactions. Fast, messy, and about as emotionally fulfilling as eating soup with a fork. And most pirates, they knew this. There were no illusions. You didn't fall in love. You fell over. 2. Illicit long distance. Relationships. Some pirates actually tried to have a proper romantic life. They'd meet a woman before going to sea, a tavern girl, a farmer's daughter, a widow with suspiciously low standards, and promise they'd come back for her. They'd write letters. Well, have someone write letters, because half of them were illiterate. They'd carry around locks of hair, or tokens, or pieces of jewellery stolen from someone else entirely but now rebranded as a love gift. But here's the problem. Pirates didn't have reliable schedules, or reliable survival rates, and there was a solid 80% chance that by the time you came back to port, if you came back at all, your beloved had married the town blacksmith, had 4 kids, and forgotten what your face looked like. 3. The secret women on board. Now, occasionally, and this did happen, women joined pirate crews, sometimes disguised as men, sometimes openly, sometimes more terrifying than any man aboard. These women were often tougher, smarter, and angrier than everyone else combined. And if you were thinking, ooh, romance, no, you did not mess with the pirate women unless you wanted your ears turned into a necklace. But sometimes, very rarely, two pirates would fall for each other, secretly, clumsily, in the middle of a life that smelled like dead fish and cannon smoke. They might carve initials into the mast, share rum, whisper secrets when the crew was asleep, but love was a liability. It made you hesitate, it made you vulnerable, and pirates didn't like being vulnerable, so mostly they kept their hearts locked up tighter than the treasure chest in the captain's quarters. Love was a luxury, one most of them couldn't afford. And if you ever did fall in love, if by some miracle you met someone who saw past the scars and the smell and the fact that you once stabbed a guy over a biscuit, you'd better hope your next raid didn't kill you. You'd better hope your ship didn't sink. You'd better hope someone didn't turn you in for the bounty on your head. Because pirate love, it was like a spark on wet wood, beautiful for a second, and then gone. All right? So you've swabbed the deck, dodged death, eaten bugs on a biscuit, maybe cried a little in the rain, and now you're wondering, was it all bad? And the honest answer is, no, not all of it. Because, yeah, being a pirate meant pain, filth, hunger, and the constant possibility of being stabbed in your sleep. It meant no comfort, no certainty, and absolutely no health insurance. But it also meant freedom. The kind of freedom most people in the world could only dream of. No lords, no landlords, no bosses breathing down your neck. Just open ocean, open skies, and the kind of reckless, dangerous camaraderie that only forms when everyone around you is one cannonball away from oblivion. You lived fast, you laughed hard, and you drank like tomorrow wasn't promised, because it wasn't. And that crew, those wild-eyed maniacs you shared your hammock space and hangovers with, they were your family, the messed-up, foul-mouthed, rum-soaked family you chose. You sang together, fought together, sometimes bled together, and when the moon was full and the ship was quiet and the sea stretched out like a silver road beneath you, you almost forgot that your boots were rotting and your teeth were loose. You almost felt like the richest soul on earth. So number you probably wouldn't last a day as a pirate. But if you did, you might never want to go back. Now, get some sleep, landlubber, and maybe dream of the sea. Just maybe leave out the scurvy part. Valuable loot, one of the earliest and most high-profile incidents of piracy, occurred when a band of pirates captured Julius Caesar, the Roman emperor-to-be, in the Greek islands. Instead of throwing him overboard, as they did with most victims, the pirates held Caesar for ransom for 38 days. When the money finally arrived, Caesar was let go. When he returned to port, Caesar immediately fitted a squadron of ships and set sail in pursuit of the pirates. The criminals were quickly caught and brought back to the mainland where they were hanged. It's no coincidence that piracy came to flourish in the Caribbean and along America's eastern seaboard during piracy's heyday. Traffic was busy, and merchant ships were easy pickings. Although pirates would search the ship's cabins for gold and silver, the main loot consisted of cargo such as grain, molasses, and kegs of rum. Sometimes pirates stole the ships as well as the cargo. Neither Long John Silver nor Captain Hook actually existed, but the era produced many other infamous pirates, including William Kidd, Charles Vane, Sam Bellamy, and two female pirates, Anne Bonny and Mary Red. The worst and perhaps cruelest pirate of them all was Captain Edward Teach, or Thatch, better known as Blackbeard. Born in Britain before 1690, he first served on a British privateer based in Jamaica. Privateers were privately owned, armed ships hired by the British government to attack and plunder French and Spanish ships during the war. After the war, Blackbeard simply continued the job. He soon became captain of one of the ships he had stolen, Queen Anne's Revenge, and set up base in North Carolina, then a British colony, from where he preyed on ships travelling the American coast. Tales of his cruelty are legendary. Women who didn't relinquish their diamond rings simply had their fingers hacked off. Blackbeard even shot one of his lieutenants so that he wouldn't forget who he was. Still, the local townspeople tolerated Blackbeard because they liked to buy the goods he stole, which were cheaper than imported English goods. The colony's ruling officials turned a blind eye to Blackbeard's violent business. It wasn't until Alexander Spotswood, governor of neighbouring Virginia, sent one of his navy commanders to kill Blackbeard that his reign finally came to an end in 1718. The most famous pirates may not have been the most successful. The reason many of them became famous was because they were captured and tried before an admiralty court, said Moore. Many of these court proceedings were published, and these pirates' exploits became legendary. But it's the ones who did not get caught who were the most successful in my book. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson may be the most famous pirate story. But the most important real-life account of pirate life is probably a 1724 book called A General History of the Robberies and Murders of the Most Notorious Pirates by Captain Charles Johnson. The tome depicts in gruesome detail the lives and exploits of the most famous pirates of that time. Much of it reads as a first-hand account by someone who sailed with the pirates, and many experts believe Johnson was actually Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, which was published in 1719. What is not in doubt is the book's commercial success at the time, and the influence it had on generations of writers and filmmakers who adopted elements of his stories in creating the familiar pirate image. So what part of the movie Pirate is true, and what is merely Hollywood fiction? What about, for example, the common practice of forcing victims to walk the plank? Not true, said Cory Convertito, assistant curator of education at the Mel Fisher Maritime Museum in Key West, Florida, which is putting on a piracy exhibit this October called Reefs, Wrecks and Rascals. The pirates' favourite form of punishment was to tie their victims to the boat with a length of rope, toss them overboard, and drag them under the ship, a practice known as keel hauling. Sadly, buried treasures and the ubiquitous treasure maps are also largely a myth. Pirates took their loot to notorious pirate hangouts in Port Royal and Tortuga, said Convertito. Pirates didn't bury their money. They blew it as soon as they could on women and booze. On the other hand, pirate flags, commonly referred to as the Jolly Roger, were indeed present during the Golden Age, and victims were often marooned on small islands by pirates. Eye patches and peg legs were also undoubtedly worn by pirates, and some kept parrots as pets. Some pirates even wore earrings, not as a fashion statement, but because they believed they prevented seasickness by applying pressure on the earlobes. In the new movie Pirates of the Caribbean, prisoners facing execution can invoke a special code, which stipulates that the pirate cannot kill him or her without first consulting the pirate captain. Indeed, pirates did follow codes. These varied from ship to ship, often laying out how plundered loot should be divided, or what punishment should be meted out for bad behaviour. But Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp's hero, probably wouldn't have lasted very long among real pirates. In the movie, he'll do anything possible to avoid a fight, something real-life pirates rarely did. The endless sword duels, a big part of all pirate movies, probably happened on occasion. But real-life encounters were often far more bloody and brutal, with men hacking at each other with axes and cutlasses. In one legendary account, a notorious pirate, trying to find out where a village had hidden its gold, tied two villagers to trees, facing each other, and then cut out one person's heart and fed it to the other. As Captain Johnson wrote in his book, "In the commonwealth of pirates, he who goes the greatest length or wickedness is looked upon with a kind of envy amongst them, as a person of a more extraordinary gallantry, and is thereby entitled to be distinguished by some post. And if such a one has but courage, he must certainly be a great man." When pirates weren't marauding on the high seas between the 1650s and 1730s, the so-called Golden Age of piracy, they sought haven in Caribbean ports to restock their goods, fix their ships, and hide from authorities. During these downtimes, they often spent their time in taverns. Any Caribbean port worth its salt offered a bevy of drinking establishments, where locals and travellers, including pirates, could come together and enjoy a hearty drink. Without doubt, pirates had a propensity for drunkenness. They were frequently described as drunk and disorderly, But it wasn't all about villainy and debauchery. Wheeling and dealing was the name of the game. Choices, choices. Back then, pirates had a choice of two types of drinking establishments: public houses, or pubs, and taverns. A public house was, quite literally, a private house that was made public. At a time when brewing ale and beer was poorly regulated and untaxed, many people saved money by brewing their own. Anyone with an excess of ale might open their house to passers-by, including pirates. Those wanting to keep a low profile would be especially interested. Taverns, on the other hand, were spaces built for the sole purpose of selling drinks, serving meals and providing entertainment. A good tavern would have a sitting area, a bar, a dance floor, and even a stable to look after a customer's horse. Sale notices, reward posters for enslaved individuals who had escaped, and news of trials and hangings covered the walls. Local prostitutes worked the crowd. Taverns were open regular hours and sold other drinks besides ale, notably wine, rum, and whiskey. They often had upstairs rooms for visitors to overnight. Despite their rowdy reputations, taverns often served as centres for community activities. For one, they functioned as informal places for sharing information and intelligence. Here, news about the latest political scandal or treaty negotiation could circulate widely. In Barbados, during the 17th century, for example, the assembly regularly met at a tavern instead of a dedicated meeting house. Secondly, taverns often operated as a casual place of commercial negotiation. Pirates also used these public spaces to their advantage. In between swills, they interacted with a variety of individuals, recruiting sailors, promoting mutiny on merchant vessels, and learning about the trade routes of various merchant ships. Pirates also made business deals with society's rich upper-class merchants and political figures who didn't dare be seen with them in traditional commercial sites. One visitor to Jamaica, John Taylor, remarked in 1683 that the island's inhabitants possessed a great amount of wealth and myriad modes of entertainment because of the pirates and privateers, pirates operating with official permission from the British Crown to protect their interests from the Spanish, who frequented the taverns and brothels there. During that time, Europe, led by England, developed policies, created trade routes, enslaved Africans, and protected markets connected to their colonies in America. This triangular trade network, which provided Europe with raw materials like cotton, tobacco, and indigo from the colonies to turn into finished goods, and relied on the work of enslaved individuals, fueled a consumer revolution, a huge demand among commoners and gentry alike to possess material goods that suddenly were more affordable. Societies used to scarcity suddenly were bombarded by frenzied consumption. The taverns became hubs of economic activity in this new type of economy. Merchants, tavern keepers, inhabitants, and pirates were all involved in the business of trading fashionable and luxury items, including tea, furniture, clothing, and spices. Pirates also traded in expensive ill-gotten loot. It's no secret that in the course of their jobs they plundered valuable items from their victims. But what use did they have with Chinese porcelain, English and Dutch blue-on-white tin-glazed earthenware, and fancy German Westerwald ware? Tavern owners readily took these costly items off their hands, no doubt at a fraction of the original price, thereby supplementing their own collections. The pirates in turn may have their profits in the same establishment. Pirates also hawked their goods to unscrupulous dealers who would later sell them through legitimate channels. In this way, average people collected a wide variety of cultural material that they might not otherwise have had access to or been able to afford. Of course, this did little to help the rightful owners who had no hope of regaining their treasures. The year is 1924. The air smells like burnt coffee, bootleg whiskey, and somebody's unpaid rent. Horns blare, shoes click on pavement, and somewhere in the distance a saxophone wails like it just got dumped. You're a detective now. The good news? You have a badge. The bad news? It doesn't mean much, especially not when every third cop is on someone's payroll, and the mayor's niece just got caught running a speakeasy out of her basement. Your office, if you can call it that, is a cramped room above a failing tailor shop. The wallpaper's peeling like it's trying to escape. The ceiling fan hasn't spun since the war, and the coffee tastes like it lost a bet. There's a desk, a dented filing cabinet, and a chair that squeaks in a way that suggests it's part mouse. You sit down, the springs groan in protest, and you start your day the same way you ended the last, staring at a case file that makes less sense the more you read it. There's a knock at the door, could be a client, could be trouble, could be both, usually is. You shout, "It's open," even though the lock doesn't work anyway, and in walks a woman with lips like danger and a story that probably has more holes than your socks. She says her husband's missing, or maybe he isn't, maybe he's just late, but she's got a bad feeling and a wad of cash that smells like guilt. You take the case because your rent's late and you're tired of eating canned beans for breakfast. Again, you hit the streets. There's no GPS, no fingerprint database, no helpful hacker sidekick whispering clues in your earpiece. There's just you, your instincts, and a city that doesn't care whether you live or die, as long as you don't block traffic. You ask around. Bartenders, bootleggers, bodega owners, some talk, most don't, and everyone smells like tobacco and regret. A kid runs by, shouts something in Italian and disappears into the crowd. You note it down. Might be a lead, might be a distraction. In this line of work, half the job is figuring out which is which before you end up in the river. You light a cigarette, because that's what detectives do, even though you hate the taste and it makes your coat smell like an ashtray that fought in the Great War. Night falls like a sack of bricks. The city glows in neon and bad decisions. Somewhere, jazz spills out of a club doorway and mixes with the sound of a police siren 2 blocks over. You've got a name now, a possible address, and the nagging feeling that you're being followed. You check over your shoulder. Nothing. Just a cat picking a fight with a garbage can, or maybe it's the other way around. Back in your office, the phone rings. That sharp, metallic ring that says something's gone wrong. It always rings at night. Always when you're alone, you answer. A voice on the other end tells you to drop the case. Or else, you laugh. Not because it's funny, but because if you didn't, you might start screaming and never stop. You hang up, sit back, and stare at the ceiling. The fan still isn't working. And that's day one. Welcome to the job, where the danger is real, the money isn't, and the only thing keeping you going is spite, caffeine, and the occasional glimmer of truth buried under 50 layers of lies. Welcome to the criminal underbelly, which is misleading, because it's less an underbelly and more the entire digestive system. In the 1920s, crime isn't something that lurks in the shadows. It's wearing a tailored suit, sitting in the front row at the opera and tipping the doorman on its way out. And no, this isn't just a bunch of pickpockets and purse snatchers. We're talking full-blown organised crime, the kind that throws parties in the front and buries bodies in the back, the kind that makes its money selling bootleg whiskey, running illegal casinos, bribing half the police force, and occasionally putting you on a to-be-dealt-with list for asking too many questions. Let's start with Prohibition, the great American idea to make the country more sober by making alcohol illegal. Genius, right? Passed in 1920, the 18th Amendment outlawed the sale, production, and transport of booze. So, naturally everyone in America immediately stopped drinking and took up knitting. Just kidding. They drank more. They just started buying it from people who didn't care about laws, mobsters. And the second that happened, the entire country turned into a pop-up liquor store with a violence problem. Speakeasies opened behind barbershops, in the back of laundromats, even underneath churches. If you had a password and $1, you could get blackout drunk by 8 p.m. and murdered by 9. Enter the mob. These weren't street thugs. These were men with $10 cigars and $100 enemies. Names like Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, Bugs Moran. Guys who built empires on bathtub gin and bloodshed. Guys who smiled for the papers, paid off the police commissioner, and had you shot in the face if you called them by their nickname. Capone especially. The man was a walking paradox. He'd donate to charity in the morning and have a guy garroted in a meat locker before lunch. Chicago was his playground, and anyone who tried to mess with his toys got buried in concrete. But this isn't just a Chicago thing. Your city, wherever you are, has its own ecosystem of crime. There's the bootleggers who run booze from the docks to the ritzy uptown clubs. There's the crooked cops who take bribes in broad daylight, then arrest you for jaywalking if you don't pay up. There's the corrupt judges, the bought politicians, the entire city council, who mysteriously got brand new Cadillacs right after voting against police reform. And you're stuck in the middle. Detectives aren't part of the law. You're like a rat on a sinking ship trying to sell life jackets. You take cases the cops won't touch, usually because the suspects are paying them off. You follow leads that go nowhere because the witnesses are either dead or too scared to talk. And if you ask too many questions, you'll be the one nobody sees again. You ever get tailed? It's fun. You'll be walking home at night, the street's quiet, and you'll hear footsteps that stop when you stop. You duck into an alley, hide behind a trash can that smells like 1922's worst decisions, and pray your .38 has at least 2 bullets. You ever get threatened? It's casual. Maybe a cigar box with a finger in it. Maybe a knock at your door from 2 men in matching suits who ask you to mind your business. Maybe your office window gets smashed with a brick that says "Stop looking," signed in red ink that smells suspiciously like typo negative. But you keep digging anyway. Why? Because someone has to. Because the woman who hired you said her husband vanished without a trace, and the cop said he probably just ran off, even though his shoes and teeth are still in the hallway. Because you know the difference between a runaway and a body dump, and because every once in a while, between the lies and the bloodstains, you find a truth that stings, like a name on a ledger, or a hidden door behind a wall of liquor crates, or a letter with a date that proves someone's alibi was faker than their marriage. Crime is the air you breathe. It's the shadow on the wall, the friend who owes you money, the cab driver who knows a little too much. You can't outrun it. You just learn to live with it. Work around it. Play both sides when you can. But don't get cocky, because crime isn't just out there, in the alleyways and nightclubs and secret poker rooms. It's in you too. That tiny voice that says, maybe just one bribe, or maybe just one drink with the guy who has a body in his trunk. The voice that wonders if the line between you and them was ever real, or just something you made up so you could sleep at night. You pour yourself another drink, not because you want to, because the glass is already in your hand and the bottle's already open. The phone rings again. Another case, another lie, another crime nobody else wants to touch. You light a match, and the room glows for a second, just long enough to remind you how dark it really is. Welcome to the job. Let's get one thing straight. In the movies, the women in a 1920s detective story fall into exactly 2 categories. There's the wide-eyed damsel, all, "Oh, Mr. Detective, I don't know where my husband went, please help me." And then there's the femme fatale, silk dress, red lips, enough perfume to knock out a bull elephant and secrets buried deeper than Jimmy Hoffa. But in real life, it's messier, smarter, and a hell of a lot more dangerous. See, in this business, everyone lies. Men lie to save face, women lie to stay alive, and the women you meet as a 1920s detective, they're not side characters, they're storms in human form. Some walk in needing help, some walk in offering it. Some walk in with a smile and a lie so smooth you don't even feel it sliding between your ribs. Let's start with the classic client. She walks into your office like she owns the place, trailing cigarette smoke and a whiff of expensive bad decisions. Her husband's missing, or cheating, or dead, or maybe all 3 depending on the order. She says she's scared. She's not. She says she has no one else to turn to. She does. They just won't return her calls. You take her case because you need the money and you're a sucker for hopeless eyes and sharp cheekbones. But halfway through, you realise the story's got holes big enough to drive a Model T through. She cries too easily, remembers too little, and the bruises on her wrist don't look recent. Then there's the hustler. She doesn't cry. She doesn't ask for help. She walks into your office not because she's in trouble, but because you are, and she needs something only you can get. Maybe it's a police file. Maybe it's leverage. Maybe it's revenge. She talks fast, pays in cash, and disappears just as quick. You'll never know her real name. She's got 5 aliases, a fake wedding ring, and a revolver she keeps in her garter. You'll see her again, usually right before something explodes. And then there's the dangerous ones. The ones who never raise their voice, never drop their gaze. The kind who can slit your throat with a compliment and get away with it because the jury fell in love halfway through her testimony. She's not here for love. She's not here for justice. She's here for control. And if you think you're steering the wheel, buddy, check your hands. She's already replaced them with strings. You might start the case with your guard up, but give it a few days. She brings you coffee, she laughs at your jokes, she says your tie's crooked and straightens it. And that's when you realise she's been in your apartment. You don't remember giving her a key. Not every woman's a trap. Some are waitresses, war widows, teachers moonlighting as typists. They've seen too much, lost too much. They don't trust cops, and they sure as hell don't trust private detectives. But sometimes, if you earn it, really earn it, they'll tell you things no one else will. Things that crack the whole case wide open. You'll sit across from them in smoky diners at 2 a.m, trading coffee for truth. And just when you think they're finally opening up, they'll stand up, drop $1 on the table and vanish into the night like they were never there. And maybe they weren't. Maybe it was just the coffee talking. The point is, in this job, you never know who's telling the truth. But women? Women are usually telling the truth. Just not always your truth. Sometimes they're the victim, sometimes they're the weapon, and sometimes they're both, in the same dress. You learn, real fast, never to underestimate a smile, or a sob story, or a woman who says, "I just want to talk." Because in the 1920s, being a woman meant surviving a world that was rigged against you, and doing it with style, sarcasm, and steel in your spine. And if you're lucky, one of them might save your life someday, or end it. Same odds, really. The roaring 20s were more like the gun-blasting 20s if you were in the business of solving crimes. Prohibition had turned America into a giant speakeasy with a body count. Cops were either on the take, turning a blind eye, or too afraid to cross the bootleggers who ran entire cities. The mob had better detectives than the government did, and they paid better too. Meanwhile, private detectives were crawling out of the shadows. Guys like Pinkerton agents were old news. The new breed were private eyes, men who worked out of dingy offices, operated in legal grey zones, and weren't above breaking a few ribs, or a few laws, to get answers. This is when we meet our first wave of real-life noir figures. Not fictional, real. Let's start with Burns International Detective Agency, which by the 1930s was neck and neck with Pinkerton. William J. Burns, the founder, was a former Secret Service agent who ran his company with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. The agency often operated as muscle for corporate America, spying on labour unions, infiltrating strikes, and sometimes just starting fights themselves to justify a crackdown. You know, classic detective work. Meanwhile, the LAPD was pioneering a new kind of public-private partnership: corruption. Detectives were handpicked not for their brains, but for their ability to look the other way. Los Angeles in the 1930s was basically a playground for gangsters, and the cops. Let's just say the line between criminal and detective was mostly a matter of uniform colour. This era also gave rise to the fictional detectives who would define the archetype: Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, the tough-talking loners who always solved the case, got the girl, and walked away just a little more broken. What people forget is these weren't pure inventions. These were thinly veiled versions of real PIs, private investigators who lived in moral swamps, charging clients by the hour and watching their conscience slowly rot. One of the most famous real-life detectives of the 20th century was Thomas Burns of New York, who coined the phrase third degree, as in the third degree of interrogation, which often included fists, truncheons, and if that didn't work, sleep deprivation. Burns's tactics were brutal, but effective. He believed in beating the truth out of people, not metaphorically, literally. Meanwhile, the FBI, under the young and terrifyingly ambitious J. Edgar Hoover, was turning into the most powerful intelligence machine in the US. But Hoover didn't like competition. He despised private detectives and thought local police were incompetent. So he started his own elite team of federal detectives, the G-Men, men in suits who chased down bank robbers, mobsters, and eventually anyone Hoover didn't like. That included communists, civil rights leaders, and sometimes just people with the wrong kind of moustache. In the background, the private detective business was booming, but not always for the right reasons. In many cities, PIs were hired by jealous spouses, corrupt politicians, or even other criminals. Want to know if your wife's cheating? Hire a gumshoe. Want to blackmail a judge? Same guy, same fee. Private detectives were essentially freelance spies, and they knew how to make anyone disappear, metaphorically or otherwise. By the late 1940s, America was a country paranoid, armed, and watching everyone. And detectives? They were both the watchers and the watched. But don't let the Hollywood glamour fool you. Behind the cinematic jazz, there were real murders, real injustices, and real broken men trying to stitch together shattered truths for $50 a day plus expenses. The noir age wasn't fantasy. It was reality with a cigarette and a head wound. And it was just getting darker. By the 1950s, the trench coats were still around, but the game had changed. The gritty gumshoe had competition, not from the mob, not from the cops, but from something colder, quieter, and infinitely more paranoid, the intelligence agencies. Welcome to the Cold War, where the word detective now came with a side of espionage, a dash of surveillance, and the possibility of being poisoned with your own umbrella. Let's get one thing straight. The Cold War wasn't cold. It was just fought in the shadows, and in those shadows detectives didn't ask questions like, who killed the dame? They asked things like, who's leaking nuclear secrets to the Soviets? Or, is this guy a communist? Or just into jazz? In America, the FBI had become an omnipresent force. J. Edgar Hoover was still in charge, and now he had more wiretaps than your average jazz club had saxophones. If you were breathing and had even looked at a red flag, chances are the Bureau had a file on you. They tapped phones, opened mail, followed people home, and not just criminals. Civil rights leaders, politicians, movie stars, and especially anyone who dared to say, maybe capitalism isn't perfect. This era saw the rise of the surveillance detective, a man who didn't wear a fedora but a headset. He didn't carry a revolver, he carried a camera in a briefcase and a bug in your toaster. Technology was the new weapon. Miniature microphones, hidden cameras, long-distance lenses. You didn't need to rough someone up anymore to know everything about them. You just needed to be quiet and patient. Across the pond, the British were playing their own spy games. The MI5 and MI6 had their own breed of detectives, university-educated gentlemen with expensive watches and no fingerprints. And yet, even they weren't immune to scandal. Remember the Cambridge Five, a ring of British spies who'd been leaking secrets to the Soviets for years, and no one noticed because they had the right accents and drank tea. It turned out even the best detectives can be blind if they're too polite to ask questions. In the USSR, the KGB made sure everyone was a detective, or an informant. Your neighbour, your friend, your dentist, any of them could be reporting on you. And if you were suspected of anti-Soviet behaviour, you'd vanish. No investigation, no phone call, no due process. Just gone. The detective work in the USSR wasn't about finding the truth. It was about enforcing the right version of it. Back in the West, the CIA was born out of the Office of Strategic Services, and it didn't take long before they realised that intelligence work wasn't just spying on enemies. It was about manipulating entire governments. Suddenly, detectives weren't just solving crimes. They were staging coups, funding rebels, and setting up front companies to launder money through Swiss banks. James Bond made it look glamorous. Real-life agents made it messy. Private detectives, they still existed, but now they were often former spooks themselves. Men who'd burned bridges with federal agencies or retired from foreign assignments, now making ends meet by tracking cheating spouses or doing background checks for shady corporations. These were hardened men with surveillance skills and PTSD, solving the kind of cases that started in bars and ended in courtrooms. One famous example, Anthony Pellicano, the so-called detective to the stars. In the 70s and 80s, he built a reputation as the go-to guy for Hollywood scandals. But his tools weren't magnifying glasses. They were wiretaps, threats, and intimidation. He wasn't a detective in the classic sense. He was a private intelligence agency with a phone book full of secrets, until he got caught, and then Hollywood got real quiet. What made Cold War-era detectives so different was this. The line between truth and lies wasn't just blurred. It was erased, redrawn, and stamped top secret. Being a detective didn't mean uncovering reality. It meant navigating an ocean of propaganda, false leads, and institutional paranoia. By the 1980s, when the Cold War was on its last legs, the detective was no longer just a man with a badge. He might be a computer hacker, a psychological profiler, or a guy who could sneak into East Berlin with a camera hidden in a shoe heel. The tools had changed, the players had changed, but the game, finding out what really happened, was still the same. Except now, most of it was illegal. By the late 20th century, detective work had taken a sharp turn into uncharted territory: the human mind. The brutal rise of serial killers in the 70s and 80s transformed investigations from purely physical clues to psychological puzzles. Detectives weren't just looking for footprints anymore, they were trying to crack the twisted minds behind the crimes. Take the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, founded in the early 70s. They pioneered what we now call criminal profiling. Instead of chasing suspects blindly, these detectives began to build psychological profiles: age, background, personality traits, possible triggers. It was like putting together a human jigsaw puzzle. Except the pieces were scattered across crime scenes, interviews and cold files. John Douglas, one of the pioneers, interviewed some of America's most infamous killers, from Charles Manson to the Atlanta child killer. His job wasn't just to catch them, it was to understand them. What made them tick? What patterns did they leave behind? What would they do next? Detectives began to use this knowledge to anticipate moves, narrow down suspects, and connect cases that seemed unrelated. Suddenly, profiling was a weapon, sometimes the only weapon, in cases with few physical clues. But with this shift came new challenges. Profiling wasn't an exact science. It was based on psychology, intuition, and experience, and sometimes led detectives down dead ends. And worse, it created the risk of bias. If you expected a killer to look or act a certain way, you might overlook the real perpetrator. Meanwhile, forensic science exploded onto the scene. The discovery and application of DNA testing in the mid-1980s revolutionized investigations. Cold cases that had gone unsolved for decades were reopened, evidence re-examined, and innocents exonerated. Detectives now had a microscopic tool that could prove guilt or innocence beyond a reasonable doubt, or raise new questions when the DNA didn't match. This period also saw the emergence of cold case squads, specialized detective teams who combed through old files with fresh eyes and new technology. Some cases became famous. The Golden State Killer, identified decades later through DNA and genealogical databases, shook the world with how technology finally caught up to a serial predator. But detective work wasn't just about technology or psychology. The media was changing the game too. The rise of true crime TV shows, newspapers hungry for sensational stories, and later the internet turned detectives into public figures, sometimes heroes, sometimes villains. Pressure to solve cases quickly grew, and the risk of mistakes, wrongful convictions or tunnel vision, increased. Detectives also faced new dangers. High-profile serial killers attracted copycats, and some investigations stirred public hysteria. The job was no longer just about catching bad guys. It was about managing public fear, political pressure, and moral questions. Yet, amidst all these challenges, detectives remained the same at heart, relentless seekers of truth. They learned to balance hard science with gut instinct, psychology with hard evidence, patience with urgency. And as the 21st century dawned, they had to face an entirely new frontier, the digital one. You're born in a nest high up in a tree. It's not fancy, just a pile of sticks held together with luck, but it does the job. Mum and Dad hover around, calling their approval like they've just built a luxury condo. Inside the nest, it's crowded. Your siblings are loud, pushy, and just as hungry as you. There's no such thing as taking turns. If you want food, you squawk louder than everyone else. Mum stays close, keeping you warm, while Dad flies back and forth with food. He works hard, bringing worms, insects, and whatever else he can scavenge. Occasionally he shows up with something that probably was not meant for birds, but you eat it anyway. Sometimes he gets help from other crows. Helpers are like the unpaid interns of the bird world, and they pitch in when there are too many beaks to feed. At first, the food is soft and pre-wet. It is not exactly appetizing, but when Mum leans over and drops it into your beak, you're not in a position to be picky. After a week or two, the menu expands to include chunkier options. Worms, beetles, and other solid snacks become the new normal. You're growing fast, and apparently that takes a lot of fuel. Beyond the nest, there's a whole world out there, but you don't care about that yet. Your only real priority is making sure you don't accidentally tumble out of the nest. It's a long drop, and you're pretty sure you wouldn't bounce. At around 1 month, Mum decides it's time for you to learn how to fly. You're not sure how wings are supposed to work, but you flap them anyway. Your first attempt ends with a graceful belly flop onto a lower branch. Not ideal. The second try is worse. You miss the branch entirely and end up in a pile of leaves on the ground. If anyone asks, you meant to do that. After a few days of bruised pride and questionable aerodynamics, you finally manage to stay in the air. Flying feels incredible, until you realise you have no idea how to land. You aim for a branch, misjudge entirely, and slam into it sideways. But hey, at least you're airborne now. Flying also comes with responsibilities. Suddenly everyone expects you to keep up with the family. Mum swoops effortlessly through the trees while you're flapping along like a busted kite. There's no time for breaks either. Hawks are always watching, and they love a wobbly rookie like you. And then there's food. Mum points to the ground, and you're supposed to figure out how to grab a beetle mid-flight. You dive down with all the confidence in the world, only to end up with a beak full of dirt. Mum just stares at you, probably wondering how you're even related. Flying is harder than it looks, but you're a crow. You've got this. Well, eventually. Here's the thing about your species. You're very smart. At first, though, you don't know much. You learn by watching. You keep an eye on the older crows, how they dig through the dirt for insects, flip over leaves to find hidden snacks, or pull scraps out of tricky places. You're not great at it yet, but you copy them until you figure it out. If one of them drops a nut from a branch to crack it open, you're right there trying the same thing. Shortly after, you also learn about predators. You don't start out knowing which animals are dangerous, so you follow the adult's lead. Hear that sharp, urgent caw? That means danger. You don't stop to think. You duck into cover and stay still. Over time, you pick up on the patterns. You learn which shapes in the sky mean trouble and which ones don't. Social skills come next. The adults communicate constantly. Caws, postures, little gestures you hadn't noticed before. You mimic those too, learning how to fit in without causing too much trouble. It's a lot to pick up, but you're getting there. And then there are humans. They leave food everywhere. Scraps, crumbs, and leftovers. You figure out where they drop things when they're distracted, and how to grab what you want without getting too close. Some humans even offer food. Others try to shoo you away, which is hilarious, because you remember faces. If they cross you once, you'll make sure they regret it later. Revenge isn't just satisfying, it's efficient. At some point you realise it's not just you, your siblings and your parents out there. There's a bigger picture. The local murder, your extended family and a few neighbours become your social circle. It's chaotic, but somehow comforting. Foraging with the murder is your first real group activity. If someone finds food, word spreads fast and everyone shows up uninvited. It's not exactly a cooperative effort, more of a free-for-all, but the numbers work in your favour. More eyes mean more chances to spot something edible. Then there's the warning system. If a predator shows up, the whole group rallies. One crow spots it, and within seconds the alarm call spreads. You scream too, because why not? It's very loud and strangely effective. Hawks, cats, and other threats learn quickly that this neighbourhood is not worth the trouble. Fitting in takes some effort. You watch the older crows to learn the unspoken rules, who to approach, who to avoid, and how to hold your own without stepping on too many feathers. It's a delicate balance, but you get the hang of it. The murder might seem like chaos from the outside, but it works. There's safety in numbers, a constant buzz of activity, and a sense that, even in the mess, you're part of something bigger. As you get older, you start spending less time with your family group. You still stick close to the murder, but your focus shifts to exploring on your own. The pull toward independence feels natural. There's a whole world out there, and it's time to see what it has to offer. Foraging becomes a solo activity. You explore new territories, testing your skills at finding food. Sometimes it's a win, like stumbling across a perfectly intact sandwich. Other times it's a humbling experience, like when you mistake a piece of plastic for something edible. Trial and error is part of the process, and you're quick to learn what's worth grabbing and what isn't. Independence has its risks. Without a sentinel crow keeping watch, you have to rely entirely on your instincts. A rustle in the bushes or a shadow passing overhead means you freeze, assess, and act fast. Most of the time, you're quick enough to avoid danger, but there are close calls, like the time you nearly became a hawk's lunch. You've learned that sharp reflexes and a healthy dose of caution go a long way. Even though you're forging your own path, the murder is always there. When food is scarce or predators are a little too bold, you rejoin the group. Foraging together is easier, and mobbing predators is far safer with backup. Independence feels good, but so is having a safety net. One afternoon, you're minding your own business, poking around for something to eat, when a fox comes out of nowhere. It jumps, charging straight at you. You flap your wings like mad and barely make it to a branch. The fox jumps after you, snapping at your tail feathers, but you're faster. You let out a sharp call by an alarm call, and within seconds, reinforcements arrive. The murder swarms in, dive-bombing the fox from every angle. You join in, swooping just close enough to make it flinch. The fox yelps, spins and bolts, running for its life as the crows chase it all the way out of the area. You shake yourself off and hop to a higher branch. Crisis averted. Stupid fox. When spring rolls around, you decide it's time to find a mate. You don't rush it. Picking the right partner is important. To impress a potential mate, you pull out all the stops. A bit of aerial acrobatics here, some confident calls there. It's not subtle, but it gets the job done. Once she agrees, you seal the deal with some mutual grooming and food sharing. With your partnership established, the two of you get to work on the nest. You both gather twigs, moss, and whatever else looks nest-worthy, hauling it up to the highest branch you can find. Predators can't climb trees, right? That's the theory anyway. After a lot of back and forth, and probably a few disagreements, the nest is done. It's sturdy and completely functional. Good enough. Soon after, your mate lays a clutch of 3 eggs. Her job is to sit on them, keeping them warm for the next few weeks. Your job? Everything else. You spend your days flying around, bringing her food and making sure nothing with claws or sharp teeth gets too close. It's exhausting, but the eggs eventually hatch, and that's when the real work begins. Now it's a tag team operation. You both take turns hunting for insects, worms, and whatever else the chicks can swallow. They're loud, constantly hungry, and completely dependent on you. To make things even more interesting, some of the other crows show up to help. They mean well, but let's just say their enthusiasm doesn't always match their usefulness. Over the next month, the chicks grow fast. They start out as tiny, awkward bundles of fluff, but before long, they're flapping their wings and testing their limits. You teach them the basics, how to find food, how to spot predators, and most importantly, how to survive without falling out of the tree. It's a steep learning curve, but they'll manage. You've built a life, raised chicks, and earned your place in the murder. You'd think things might slow down, but no. Life as a crow is a full-time job. Foraging is still a mix of strategy and sheer luck. You've learned where the best scraps are. Bins, picnic tables, human leftovers. But so is everyone else. It's a race to get there first, and someone's always trying to snatch your prize. Then there's the constant need to stay sharp. From a hawk to a cat, everything out there is probably trying to eat you. You mob those predators until they run away, annoyed but unharmed. Even humans can be a problem. Some are kind enough to toss food your way, while others swing brooms like you've declared war on their garden. You never know what to expect, and yet, it's not all stress. Every so often you get a chance to explore. You mess with sticks, test out new ways to open tough shells, and sometimes just watch the world below from your perch. Your curiosity keeps you sharp, but it also gets you into trouble. This is life at its peak. Cleverness, survival, and keeping one step ahead of everything and everyone. It's not glamorous, but you wouldn't have it any other way. But soon, everything will change. One day, while you're perched on a branch, a hawk comes out of nowhere. You do not even see it coming. There is no warning, no chance to react. In an instant, you are pushed from the tree and fall to the ground like a stone. A while later, a human walks by. They see your body and crouch down, tilting their head like they're trying to figure out what went wrong. They poke you gently, maybe even whisper something, not realizing you are beyond help. Your murder watches from the trees. To them, this is clear-cut. The human killed you. That is all they need to know. From that day on, they make the human's life miserable. They scream at him every time he walks by, dive bomb him, and make sure he never feels safe outside again. He has no idea why you're gone. But your group remembers, not just through the tricks you taught them, but by turning their rage into a lifetime grudge. You wake up in the dark. Not because it's nighttime, but because there's no light in your barracks. Just the sound of coughing. Lots of it. Someone's hacking up something that might have once been a lung. It's minus 30 degrees Celsius outside, and not much warmer inside. Your blanket is thinner than a Soviet excuse for why you're here. A guard kicks the door open and yells something that basically translates to get up or get hit. So you get up. Your clothes, not yours. Just some itchy, lice-ridden uniform 3 other guys probably died in. No socks. Your boots don't match. One leaks. Both are frozen. Your breakfast is a ladle of something grey. It might be food, or it might be punishment. No one's really sure anymore. You're marched outside into the snow with your work group. You're assigned to logging today, which sounds peaceful, until you realise you're doing it with a blunt axe and no gloves. Your fingers stop working after 10 minutes. You stop complaining after 15, because someone did, and now they're not here anymore. Around hour 4, someone collapses. The guards drag him away. No one asks where. Everyone already knows. You try to keep pace. Because if you're too slow, you get less food tomorrow. And if you get less food, you work slower. Then you get less food again. It's a fun little loop called starvation. Very popular in the gulags. You make it to lunch. It's soup again. Hot, technically. Tastes like regret and cabbage. You think about asking for more, then remember last week when someone did that. You haven't seen him since. You assume he's now part of the soup. The afternoon is more logging. Your hands are bleeding now, but that's good. Bleeding means they're still attached. The guy next to you lost 2 fingers last month. He wrapped them in rags and just kept going. He's kind of your hero now. At sunset, you'll march back. You pass a group digging a trench. You don't ask what for. It's always safer not to know. Dinner is the same as breakfast. So's the coughing. So's the cold. Lights out. Not that you had lights. You lie in the dark, covered in lice and frostbite, and listen to someone weep quietly in the bunk below. It's his birthday. He just turned 22. He looks 50. So? You're sitting on a wooden bench that somehow feels colder than the snow outside. Your hands are shaking, your fingers are stiff, and your stomach feels like it's trying to digest itself. Congratulations. It's mealtime. Kind of. The gulag doesn't do menus. You don't pick your meal. You just hope it doesn't wriggle. Breakfast is a ladle of kasha, which is like porridge. But if porridge gave up on life and decided to become glue, it's usually made from barley or millet, but don't get excited. The grains are undercooked, the water's dirty, and if there's a lump of fat in it, that's basically Christmas. There's no sugar, no milk, and the closest thing to flavour is the wooden spoon you use to eat it. Sometimes you get a chunk of bread. It's dark, dense, and about as nutritious as a brick. You don't chew it so much as gnaw on it and pray your teeth hold out. If you're lucky, there's a pinch of salt in the entire loaf. If you're really lucky, there's no mould. But let's be honest, you eat the mould anyway. It's the only colour in your diet. Lunch is soup, always soup. It's hot. Not warm, not tasty, just hot enough to remind you you're still alive. The base is water. The flavour? Uncertainty. It might have a shred of cabbage in it, or a single bean, or on rare holidays an actual piece of meat, so small you mistake it for a dirty fingernail. The other prisoners call it soldier soup, because you could march all day and still starve to death. If you worked really hard in the morning, and by really hard I mean until your fingernails split and your joints lock up, You might get an extra half ladle. Maybe. Or the guard might eat it in front of you. That's also part of the fun. There's a slice of bread again. Same one as this morning. Still brick. Still delicious. Still your best friend. Dinner is, well, it's breakfast. And lunch had a very bitter, very watery child. It's grey. It's vague. It's something that makes you nostalgic for your worst meal back home. Remember that gas station sandwich you once ate at 3 a.m. and regretted for a week? Yeah, that was Michelin star cuisine compared to this. There's sometimes a piece of fish. Technically, it's been salted so hard it could be used as a weapon. No one's quite sure what kind of fish it is, and no one asks. You just eat it before it eats through your metal bowl. Oh right, bowls. You get one. You guard it with your life. If someone steals it, you're done. If it breaks, you're done. No bowl means no food, and no food means, you guessed it, done. You'd think people might steal each other's meals. They don't. Not because they're kind, but because the guards would beat you senseless for upsetting the food line. Steal food, and you're either dead or transferred to punishment rations, which is just a fancy way of saying, we're not feeding you anymore, but we'll still work you to death. Now, vitamins. You don't get them. Everyone has scurvy. Everyone's gums bleed. Teeth fall out like autumn leaves. You learn to chew on birch bark or pebbles just to feel something in your mouth. By week 2, your hunger becomes a background noise. By week 3, you start hallucinating roast chickens. By week 4, the hallucinations stop, because your body's now using the last of its muscle tissue just to keep your heart going. Could you survive on Gulag rations? Technically yes, for a while. But you'll be skinnier than a Soviet excuse for invading Finland, and you'll be dreaming of food so obsessively that even rat meat will start to look gourmet. Bon appétit. So, you've been starving for weeks, sleeping on frozen planks, breaking rocks with a pickaxe that should have been retired in 1902, and your body's so broken you can't tell if your foot hurts or if it's just gone. But then, oops, you messed up. Maybe you spoke too loud. Maybe you sat down for 5 seconds too long. Maybe the guard was just bored. Doesn't matter. In the Gulag, suffering isn't a side effect, it's the point. Let's start with the basic punishments for those cute little infractions like talking in line or walking too slow because your legs are literally frostbitten. First up, the cold box, also called the isolator. It's a tiny wooden cell, usually with zero insulation, no windows, and a door that seals tighter than your fate. You're tossed inside with nothing, no coat, no blanket, no food, and left there for a day, or 2, or a week, in winter, Siberian winter, the kind of cold that makes metal snap and blood crystallize. Some prisoners wished they'd freeze to death in there. Most didn't. Most just came out with damaged lungs, blackened fingers, and a smile that said, I've seen the void, and it was colder than this soup. Didn't learn your lesson? Great. Here comes the pit. It's exactly what it sounds like. A hole in the ground, covered with planks. You're shoved in there like an inconvenient secret and left alone, in the dark, with the rats and your thoughts. There's no standing up. There's no lying down. You sit and freeze and sit and regret ever being born. Still not enough? Let's talk beatings. No trial, no explanation. Just a sudden crack to the skull with a rifle butt or a wooden baton. Some guards get creative. They beat you with sticks, with frozen ropes, with whatever's handy. One guy got whipped with telephone wire. Why? Because he asked for toilet paper. A real crime against the Soviet Union. And here's the fun part. They don't beat you to kill you. That would be merciful. They beat you to hurt, but not end. The idea is to make an example, to show everyone else what happens when you forget your place in this icy hellhole. Now, if you really screw up, like escape attempts, sabotage, or God forbid sarcasm, then you graduate to punishment brigades. Imagine the hardest labour in the camp. Now double it. You're sent to chop timber in the taiga, waist deep in snow, with no gloves. Or you're made to carry massive logs uphill while wearing torn boots. No breaks, no water, no food except half a frozen potato if you're still breathing by nightfall. Most didn't make it a week. Some didn't make it to lunch, and if you're caught trying to escape, you don't get beaten, you don't get put in the box, you just disappear. Shot in the woods, buried in a shallow grave. No one asks questions. No one ever even says your name again. Because here's the brutal truth. In the Gulag, you're not a person. You're a number, a statistic, a pair of lungs wasting Soviet air, and if you can't pull your weight, or if you so much as breathe wrong, they will replace you. The only thing cheaper than food here is you. Let's say you've made it this far. Your fingers are frostbitten, your ribs are poking through your skin like they're trying to escape, your cough sounds like a dying accordion, and your leg's been broken since Tuesday. But you're still breathing, technically, so you figure, hey, maybe it's time to see a doctor. Oh, sweet child, that's adorable. Welcome to Soviet Gulag Healthcare, proudly sponsored by Band-Aids, Hope and Communism. Let's start with the basics. There were no real doctors. Sometimes, if you were lucky, there was a prisoner who used to be a doctor 10 years ago, before his anti-Soviet biology lectures got him locked up. But by the time he's working in the camp hospital, he's blind in one eye and hasn't touched clean tools since Stalin had a moustache worth trusting. Medical supplies? Ha! You'll get a dirty rag, a splintery wooden stretcher, and maybe, a half-used syringe they also used to drain pus from the guy with typhus. And forget antibiotics. If you get an infection, you just ride it out. Like a feverish cowboy, only the horse is dysentery and it's dragging you through 6 feet of snow. The most common treatment in the Gulag? Observation, which means they watch you die. They put you in the so-called hospital barrack, a wooden shack with no heating, and more lice than pillows, and wait to see if you're strong enough to crawl back to work or just expire quietly in the corner. You got scurvy? Chew on your own boot leather? Got trench foot? Cut it off yourself. The sore's over there by the blood-stained wall. You've gone half blind from malnutrition? That's fine. You don't need eyes to dig holes. But the worst part, you didn't want to go to the hospital, because the hospital meant you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, your food ration got cut, down to starvation levels. So if you thought getting pneumonia was bad, try getting pneumonia and only being fed a crust of bread every 48 hours. So yeah, prisoners would literally hide their wounds, bind their own limbs with torn shirts, stuff raw meat into open cuts to keep them from rotting, because even dying slowly was better than being treated. And when people died in the hospital, their bodies were stripped, dumped, and replaced before the mattress even cooled. Sometimes your only chance at rest was in a bed someone else just died in. Some prisoners pretended to be sick to escape work. Those guys, if caught, they were punished twice. First, for being lazy. Second, for wasting the state's valuable imaginary medicine. Bottom line, if you get sick in a gulag, there is no medicine. There is no healing. There is only pain. And the hope that you die fast, or that someone sicker than you crawls in and takes your place on the floor. Because in the Soviet Gulag, healthcare wasn't about saving lives. It was about sorting out the weak and clearing space for the next broken body in line. Gus, you've made it through another soul-crushing 14-hour shift digging frozen dirt. Your fingers are black with frostbite, your stomach's growling like a bear in mating season, and your lungs are coughing up particles of despair. But hey, it's evening now. Surely it's time for some well-earned leisure. Welcome to Gulag Entertainment, where the only thing more dead than your sense of hope is the guy who tried to tell jokes last week. Let's break down your options. Option 1. Collapse. The number one most popular evening activity was simply passing out on a lice-infested wooden bunk while still half-dressed. This required no equipment, no talent, and no will to live, which made it ideal for 100% of prisoners. Option 2. Listening to someone weep quietly into their soup. Nothing builds camaraderie like mutual despair. Someone sobbing into their cabbage water about the family they'll never see again. That's your nightly podcast. Option 3. Cultural enrichment. Once in a blue moon, usually when a high-ranking officer needed to show off, the camp would host a performance. This meant dragging out a prisoner who used to play violin, or read poetry, or had a decent baritone before his teeth fell out. They'd recite Pushkin or sing a Soviet anthem, while the guards glared with rifles and the prisoners sat too tired to clap. It was less a concert and more a reminder of what actual life used to feel like before the cold ate your soul. Option 4. Story time. This was the Gulag's version of Netflix. Old prisoners would whisper stories about their lives before the camps. Some were lies, most were sad. All were told in hushed tones while trying not to get caught conspiring, because even talking too much could be considered suspicious behaviour. Option 5. Rat chasing. Yes, seriously. If you had a spare burst of energy, or needed protein that didn't come from your imagination, you could go after rats with a stick. Catch one, you're tonight's chef. Miss? Congrats, now you've got fleas. Option 6. Gambling. No chips, no cards, no house rules. Just desperate men betting chunks of their food rations on literally anything. Arm wrestling, cockroach races, how long it would take the new guy to cry. Spoiler, not long. Option 7. Dreaming about escape. This wasn't entertainment in the fun sense, more like a nightly ritual of mentally replaying your arrest, trial, sentencing, and the absurd idea that maybe, just maybe, someone on the outside would remember you exist. Of course, you couldn't talk about escape. That would land you in solitary, or worse. But in your head, every bunk became a portal to some fantasy where you were warm, free, and not eating bread made of sawdust. And finally, Option 8. Watching people go mad. Some prisoners would start laughing uncontrollably, others would talk to invisible people, dig imaginary tunnels, or scream in their sleep every night until their voice gave out. At some point, the mind breaks, and when it does, everyone just scoots over a bit and lets it happen. Because in the Gulag, entertainment wasn't about joy, it was about distraction. Just something, anything, to make you forget you're living in one of the cruelest systems ever designed by man, where survival itself was a twisted form of resistance, and the only comedy was how long you could keep going. So, would you survive a day in a Soviet Gulag? Sure. If you're immune to cold, starvation, forced labour, disease, psychological torture, beatings, isolation, betrayal, and existential dread, then yeah, you'd be just fine. But for the other 99.9999% of us, you wouldn't last. Not because you're weak, but because the Gulag was designed to break people. It didn't matter if you were innocent, strong, smart, loyal, or lucky. Everyone went in thinking they could survive. Most came out as ghosts, if they came out at all. And what's worse, it wasn't just about punishment, it was about control, about fear, about making sure no one ever asked questions again. So next time you're upset because your phone died or Starbucks ran out of oat milk, just remember, at least you're not getting 10 years of hard labour for telling a joke about Stalin's moustache. Sleep tight. Don't dream of barbed wire. A rare survivor of the harshest Stalin-era labour camps has died aged 89 in Russia's Far East. Vasily Kovalyov had survived icy punishment cells and beatings in the USSR's notorious Gulag prison system. During an escape attempt in 1954, he spent 5 months hiding in a freezing mine with 2 other prisoners. Kovalyov's story was featured in Vesma, a news site based in Magadan. The communist regime shipped thousands of enemies to prison camps via Magadan. In 1950, Kovalyov, aged 20, was found guilty of anti-Soviet sabotage, one among the millions of victims of Stalinist terror. An old sabre that he had used to chop vegetables was enough to condemn him. First, he was sent to Norilsk, in the Russian Arctic, he told Vesma, but he ended up in Kolyma, a notoriously harsh network of labour camps north of Magadan, after guards uncovered an escape plot. In 1954, he and 2 other inmates hid in a mine and prepared an armed uprising, but someone tipped off the guards, who then came looking for them. Miners who knew the place inside out accompanied them, and said we wouldn't be able to stand the permafrost there longer than a week, he told Vesma. They blocked all the entrances with grills. We spent 5 months underground, in the dark, starving. After 3 months we had eaten all our food, and in the end we were chewing wood shavings. He said they managed to dig a way out through the permafrost and emerged half-blind like moles. They made it to a nearby town but were arrested there. During a punishment beating, the guards let loose a huge sheepdog on him, he said. It leapt at me, but I had protective metal studs on my boots and kicked the dog down. In a flash I dived at its throat and bit hard. I heard a crunch and the dog shuddered, then died. Millions died during Joseph Stalin's dictatorship, in deportations, famine, forced collectivization, executions and prison camps. The terror he unleashed involved massive purges of the Communist Party and state institutions. Kovalyov was released in 1957, when Stalin's successor Nikita Khrushchev declared an amnesty for Gulag prisoners in the post-Stalin thaw. He stayed in Magadan, where he worked as a heating engineer, and he took a Vesma reporter, Yevgeny Radchenko, on a tour of the grim prison, a ruin still reeking of cruelty. He died of a stroke in a Magadan hospital on Monday. According to Vesma, until his last breath, he never forgot what the Soviet Union did to millions of people who endured the camps, leaving their best years, their health and their lives there. He told the story of his trip back to Odessa region, where he met the people who had put him in prison. He did not forgive them. The cruelty and torment of camp life taught him to survive, but at the same time to stay human. Very few Kolyma prisoners from the Stalin period are still alive, a Russian historian told the BBC. Alyona Kozlova, chief archivist at the Memorial Documentation Center, said, "I know of 3 in Moscow, and it's possible that he was the last one in Magadan. But about 4 million ex-Soviet citizens are alive today who spent some time in Stalin's prisons," she said. We often think of medieval princesses in terms of fairy tales, as beautiful young ladies waiting around in their tall, pointy hats for some knight to come along and rescue them from a tower. But the reality was far less romantic. Let's travel back in time now to the Middle Ages and meet some of these noble ladies and take a little look at how they navigated such an overwhelmingly male world. The life of a princess was not nearly as glamorous as the Hollywood movies would have us believe. They were not even referred to as princesses until the early modern age. Before that, they were daughters of the king, or just plain old ladies. Yes, they would have lived a privileged life, wearing rich silks and velvets. They would have also eaten the best food and drank the most expensive wines, probably from silver plates and goblets. But sadly, they were often used as commodities by their fathers, a resource to be married off to whomever he chose and traded for political gain. But, as we shall see, some of these medieval princesses were women who could hold their own, and proved that they were not just pawns to be used by the men in their lives, the asset. Sometimes princesses had to marry older men, like Adela of Normandy. She was the youngest daughter of William the Conqueror, and although she would never inherit any titles from her father, her bloodline alone made her a valuable asset. The high-spirited and educated girl was married to Stephen II, Count of Blois, when she was just 15. Stephen was 35, but the marriage linked together 2 of the most powerful families in northern France. Adela and Stephen had between 6 and 8 children, and their marriage was said to be one of mutual respect rather than affection. Princess Joan, who was born in 1210, was the 3rd child of King John of England and Isabella. She was passed about from pillar to post. First, she was wanted as a wife of Philip II of France for his son, but her father promised her to Hugh X of Lusignan as recompense because his father, Hugh IX, had been jilted by her mother Isabella, who married King John instead. Joan was gifted a county and the Isle of Olorn as a dowry, so she was sent to France to be brought up in court there until the wedding. But Hugh wanted the lands before the marriage, and when he didn't get his way, he wasn't quite as keen. When King John died in 1216, Joan's mother Isabella decided that she would marry Hugh herself, as it was agreed that Joan should marry Alexander II of Scotland instead. So Joan was sent home to be married at York Minster, making her Queen Consort of Scotland. Alexander was 23, Joan was 11. They didn't have any children, which was a problem, and Alexander probably wanted an annulment but was afraid of provoking a war with England. It's likely the couple became estranged. Joan decided to go on a pilgrimage to Canterbury with her sister-in-law, Queen Elena. Sadly, Joan died in the arms of her brother, King Henry III, at the age of just 27, the fighter. However, some princesses were much more than just finely dressed ornaments. King Edward I, known as Longshanks, married Eleanor of Castile in 1254 when they were both teenagers. Edward has been described as a great and terrible king, and as far as medieval kingship went, he was very successful, pious and military-minded. But he was also very brutal in his treatment of the Scots and the Jews. A great king, but not a very nice man. Nevertheless, he did have a close and tender relationship with his wife and daughters. Eleanor had about 16 pregnancies, although most of the children didn't reach adulthood. Only 6 of them survived at the age of 10, 5 girls and 1 son. The oldest surviving daughter was Eleanora, who was for a long time heir to the throne, as each of her brothers were born and then died in childhood. This meant that Eleanora was educated in statecraft as though she were a prince. For a long time, she was betrothed to King Alfonso III of Aragon, but Edward dragged his feet over the union despite repeated requests from Alfonso. In 1282, Edward insisted that his wife and mother were concerned that Eleanora, who was 13 at that time, was too young for marriage, and that the Aragonese ruler would have to wait another 2 years, despite the fact that Alfonso was only 4 years older than Eleanora. In the 14th century, a court writer noted that a princess needed to know how to use weapons, so that she may be ready to command her men if the need arises. And all of that training from her father paid off when Eleanora was married to Henry III of Bar, a count of northern France, in 1297. 4 years after their marriage, Henry was fighting near the town of Lille when he was taken to Paris as a prisoner. It was up to Eleanora to organise Henry's remaining army and defend the castle at Bar. She quickly wrote to her father, King Edward, for allies and money to pay Henry's ransom, safeguarding herself and her children. Some 30 years earlier, in 1265, another princess named Eleanor of England had successfully defended Dover Castle against her own brother, King Henry III. She was married to the ill-fated rebel baron Simon de Montfort. After her husband and eldest son were killed in battle, she fought to protect the castle by using its coastal position and bringing in a siege engine. She allowed her children to escape overseas with money for their care. The idealist. Like many medieval princesses, King Edward I's second daughter, Joan of Acre, was first married to a much older man. He was 46 and she was 18. When he died 4 years later in 1290, Joan could have been wed to any European ruler. Along with her princess status, as a mother of 4 she had proved that she was fertile, and now she solely owned some of the most valuable lands in England. But she fell in love with a young, handsome man of little standing named Ralph de Monthermer. Joan owed homage to her father because she held land given directly to her by him, so she needed permission to marry. Despite this, Joan and Ralph were wed in secret. King Edward, furious at first, soon forgave his determined daughter, and she got to keep her lands, her income, and her man. Princess Eleanor of England had also married for love in 1238 in a secret ceremony. But this time it was her brother, King Henry III, who was livid and said he only allowed the marriage because Simon had seduced her. The couple were determined to stay together, though. Simon even travelled to Rome to seek papal approval because Eleanor had previously sworn a lifetime oath of chastity. The Gambler. Mary of Woodstock, the 4th daughter of Edward I, was born in 1278, and she didn't marry at all. Instead, she led a very comfortable life as a nun. She was dedicated to Asbury Priory at the age of 7 and veiled when she was 12. Mary was gifted a £100 a year allowance from her parents, which is around £14,000 today, private quarters, and special wine. In 1306, when Mary set off on a pilgrimage to St Mary's Shrine at Walshingham, everything was paid for by her father. The journey took 1 month to travel from Northampton to Walshingham and back to the Priory. Mary and her female companions ate lavishly and were entertained along the way by minstrels. Despite the king already spending a small fortune on this little adventure, Mary had to send messengers 3 times over the month to ask for more funds. Mary, it seems, was partial to a bit of gambling. The problem was she wasn't very good at it, and ran up some astronomical debts playing dice. It's a good job she had a rich and indulgent father to pay them off for her, the scholar. When she wasn't roaming around the countryside accumulating huge gambling debts, Mary was busy commissioning books about the history of her father's reign. The book was written in the dialect that Mary spoke, Anglo-Norman, which suggests that she was going to read it herself. Being fluent in reading and writing meant being literate in Latin, something that only priests, a few nuns, and a small number of laymen and women were able to achieve. Mary and her siblings were educated by their mother, Eleanor of Castile. They were able to recite prayers and read devotional works, romances, and histories together. Writing was even more rare, but records exist for the purchase of writing tablets that show Mary's older sister Eleanor was practicing writing as a teenager. The Tourist. Elizabeth of Rhuddlan was the youngest of Edward I's daughters. She was already a widow by the time she was 18. Born in 1285, her marriage was even being debated when she was just 3 years old, and she was wed to John I, Count of Holland, when they were both 15, in 1297. When John died just 2 years later in mysterious circumstances, as many medieval royals seemed to do, Elizabeth was desperate to get back home. So she set off from Holland in the summer of 1300 on a journey by land and sea that took her almost 2 months. But travelling was something that Elizabeth, along with her sisters, was well used to. The English court was completely transient, and with the king at its heart would move up and down the country from one royal castle, monastery, or aristocratic home to another. Along with the monarch, his wife, and any child over the age of 8, there were servants, clerks, and knights, all in a convoy of horses, carriages, and carts. Once independent from their parents, the princesses would have toured with their own households, either perched prettily at top of a saddled palfrey, or in an uncomfortable springless coach, being bounced about on unmade roads. The Architect. In the late 1290s, Edward's third daughter, Margaret, found herself in an embarrassing situation. Her husband, the Duke of Brabant, was not being very discreet with his dames at court in Brussels. She needed a court of her own, somewhere away from her husband's mistresses, somewhere attractive enough that she could entice influential courtiers away. She found that none of the existing royal households were magnificent enough for her requirements, so she built her own at Tervuren in Belgium. Margaret had learned about the building of castles from the best. Her father had built a chain of 10 fortifications across Wales, known as the Ring of Iron Castles, after he had captured the Principality. But Edward's castles were much more than just imposing military constructions. They showcased decorative masonry and refined gardens. Margaret, who had visited these castles in her childhood, was able to draw on her father's legacy to create Tervuren, a modern royal residence that asserted Margaret's position as the Duchess of Brabant, the defiant one. Joan proved that she was not afraid of her father when she married for love, but she had always been defiant, even in her youth, shattering the myth of the compliant and beautiful princess. When she learned that her sisters had larger households and consequently more paid servants, she argued with her father's clerks. She also deliberately missed the wedding of one of her sisters, just to prove that she could. Things came to a head in July 1305, when Joan's brother, the future Edward II, had some of his income and lands confiscated by his father. The king was not happy with the prince because of his favouritism of the courtier Piers Gaveston. Joan sent her own seal to her brother and told him he could use it to buy anything he liked, in a direct act of defiance against her father. The prince was told to return his sister's seal, but for Joan there were no consequences. Summer, blue skies, green fields, and a golden warmth, or so I'm told. I live in the north of England. I haven't really ever experienced summer, but for the medievals, it was a time of celebration for all classes, perhaps the best time of the year for social gatherings. But work still had to be carried out in the fields, and summer was also a time of heat waves, droughts, wildfires, plague, and fever. The church and agricultural calendars dominated the lives of the common medievals, and in the summer it was a case of work hard, play hard. It was a time of harvests, usually beginning in June, when the peasants had to reap the meadows to get hay and fodder for the sheep, cattle and horses. The French author Jean de Brie, known as the Good Shepherd, wrote a treatise on sheep breeding in the mid-13th century. He recommended that from June, the shepherds should get up very early, at dawn when the day was coolest, and take the livestock to pasture. There needed to be sufficient shade for the animals, and if possible, they should be moved to higher, colder areas so that they wouldn't overheat. In August, de Brie said, the sheep should be stabled, or there was a risk that they would eat all of the wheat. With all that hot farm work going on, what was better than a summer party with plenty of ale and food? It could be said that summer in the Middle Ages was ushered in at Pentecost. The holiday is still celebrated today in Britain and is known as Whitsun or Whit Sunday. The medieval summer was filled with important days like May Day, the Feast of the Holy Trinity, and Corpus Christi on the second Sunday after Pentecost, when there was always a public procession to celebrate the communion bread and wine. In July, there was the Feast of Saint Anne, Mother of the Virgin, and a celebration of the visitation of the Virgin to her cousin Elizabeth. In August, it was Lammas Day and the Transfiguration of Jesus that were celebrated. People were obliged to attend church on the 1st of August, the feast day of St. Peter ad Vincula, to offer their Peter's pence, also known as smoke farthings or smoke money. This was a tax that had to be given to the church. A penny had to be paid from every house. These religious festivals were a great excuse for outdoor entertainment in the finer weather. The famous York, Chester, and Wakefield mystery plays were always held on the Feast of Corpus Christi, and others were held all over England. There were also fairs with minstrels, music, and possibly a bonfire or two, as a nod back to the Celtic past. There might be dancing and summer carolling, as this was done during the summer as well as at Christmas. And most of the songs were quite bawdy rather than religious. Games, tournaments and sports were also popular during the medieval summer. Drinking and gambling were always popular among the peasantry at any time of year, causing the cleric Robert de Brun to complain that dances, cards, summer games, of many such come many shames. In 1303, all that working and cavorting in the summer heat led some people down to the nearest body of water to cool off with a swim. The beautifully illustrated Book of Hours of the Duke of Berry, brother of King Charles I of France, contains an illuminated page for each month of the year. The August page shows peasants wearing hats, hard at work in the fields, while a naked man is sitting on the riverbank and drying himself in the sun as his companions swim in the water. Not many medievals could swim, though, and this was highlighted in a city ordinance from 14th century Paris, which read, "Because in these hot days many people have had enjoyment and desire to go bathe in the same river, many great inconveniences have unfolded because many of these people have drowned in the river, which is a very pitiful thing. To reform the foolish minds of young people and other people who go bathe in the river, we forbid that anyone bathes naked in the river, otherwise they'll be put in jail." I can only hope that someone's warned the Olympic swimmers about this, the girls of summer. Without any protection, the common people of Northern Europe would find themselves suffering from the problems of sunburn, just as they do today. Medical manuscripts contained recipes to help with problems such as this. In the 10th century Anglo-Saxon compilation known as Bald's Leech Book, they recommended, quote, "boiling in butter tender ivy twigs and smearing therewith." The dominant beauty standard of the time was for fair skin. This was seen as a sign of wealth and status, and an indication of a woman's financial standing. Tanned skin was associated with the peasants who toiled outside in the fields all day. Medieval physicians recommended that women should protect their skin with wide-brimmed hats and parasols, or avoid going out in the sun altogether. The Trotula, a 12th century text on women's medicine, recommends using boiled deer tallow for roughness of the face caused by the sun. The treatise also discusses the benefits of a very useful unguent that is good for sunburn for both the treatment and prevention. The ointment was to be applied at night and left on during the day to preserve the ladies from sunburn, sort of like an early version of the sunscreens that we use today. Sadly though, the ointment consisted of 1 ounce of lily root, 2 ounces of white lead, mastic and frankincense, camphor, animal grease, and rosewater. The ointment was used by the women of Salerno, Italy, to also, quote, raise the skin and colour it beautifully. We are now aware of lead poisoning and can only imagine the horrific symptoms that many of these poor women suffered when ingesting lead into their bodies. Symptoms like headache, constipation, infertility, and in some extreme cases seizures, coma, and even death. Summer breeze doesn't make me feel fine. As far as physicians were concerned, July and August were just about the most dangerous time of year for us humans, believing that the summer air was corrupted and infected and carried the miasma thought to bring deadly diseases. Medieval medicine followed the belief of the 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, introduced by Hippocrates. These 4 substances were organised around the 4 elements, the 4 attributes of cold, hot, moist and dry, and the 4 seasons. It was the yellow bile that was the problem in summer. According to Bartholomew Anglicus, the sun was at its highest point and shone directly on the top of a person's head. This caused an excess of yellow bile, the dry, hot humour associated with being short-tempered and easily angered. In summer, Bartholomew added, the body would heat up, and then perspiration would cause it to dry and become weak. This could cause people to be affected by plagues, fevers, and other hot and dry diseases. The first confirmed outbreak of the mysterious sweating sickness was in 1485. It's possible that there may have been an outbreak as early as June, although records of the patient's symptoms aren't complete enough to be sure. According to the Croyland Chronicle, Thomas Stanley, the 1st Earl of Derby, gave sweating sickness as the reason why he didn't join Richard III's army at the Battle of Bosworth. It's not sure whether this is true, as there is speculation that Henry Tudor's army brought the sickness over from France with his French mercenaries. Nevertheless, by the summer of 1485 the disease was in England, and when the new plague hit down to the beginning of Henry VII's reign, it caused anger, mass paranoia, and superstition. The epidemic hit right at the end of the Wars of the Roses, which saw the death of the Yorkist King Richard and the crowning of Henry Tudor. The people wanted something, or someone, to blame for the new disease, and some believed that God had sent the sickness to punish Henry's supporters. Cruel summer. A physician named Thomas Forrester recorded his experience of the sweating sickness, and wrote about how sufferers became suddenly breathless in their final hours, when loathsome vapour had gathered around the heart and lungs. Oh my God! In the mid-16th century, a physician from Shrewsbury named John Caius noted that the disease began with a sudden sense of dread and violent cold shivers, dizziness, and a headache. Then came pains in the neck, shoulders, and limbs, followed by chronic fatigue. Any time after 1 to 3 hours the sweating began, with delirium, palpitations, heart pain, and extreme thirst. In the end, there was an irresistible need to sleep, and Caius believed that if the patient gave in to this urge, then death was inevitable. There was no immunity, and some people might contract the disease several times before dying. Most either recovered or died within 24 hours, and the disease occurred in the summer and early autumn. The epidemic hit London on the 28th of August, and by late October 1485, sweating sickness had killed thousands of people, including 3 sheriffs, 6 aldermen, and 2 lord mayors. The cause remains unknown, although sewage, bad sanitation, and contaminated water have all been blamed for the illness. At some point, a couple of known diseases have been proposed as reasons for the outbreaks, including relapsing fever, spread by ticks and lice, and hantavirus, which is carried by bats and rodents. Relapsing fever usually only occurs during the summer months, but symptoms include a rash and a scab at the site of the tick bite. Hantavirus is also seasonal and, unlike most diseases that strike down children and the elderly first, usually affects middle-aged adults. something it has in common with the sweating sickness of the Middle Ages, hot like the summer. In 1077, the Wester manuscript noted that, quote, "It was the dry summer, and wildfires came on many shires and burned down many villages, and also many towns burned down, just as they are today." Forest fires were an ongoing problem during the medieval summer. Houses tended to be made with wooden beams, often with thatched roofs, and had rushes or straw on the floor, making them a real fire risk. The Chronicle of John Waylster also reported that fire in the air, commonly called wildfire, burnt many townships and cornfields in Derbyshire and several other regions in 1048. To make matters worse, houses were closely packed together along the narrow, windy streets of medieval towns and cities. Shops were usually made from flammable materials as well, and then there were stables and wooden bridges. Parisians were ordered to keep a pot next to their door in case of fire during the hot months. Most people have heard of the Great Fire of London of 1666, but there was another devastating fire in the city long before that, in 1212. In John Stow's summary of the English Chronicles, he claimed that around 3,000 lives were lost. The fire began in early July, just south of the River Thames. It destroyed a church and Bury High Street before reaching London Bridge. There, high winds spread burning embers across the bridge, and the blaze quickly spread to the other side of the river. Many people were trapped on London Bridge between two walls of flame, as the wooden shops and homes on the bridge caught alight. Those who did not die in the fire jumped into the river and drowned. Only the bridge, which was made from stone, survived. Medieval summers were very much like our own. People tried to cool off by swimming, finding shade and using sunscreen to protect themselves. Work still went on, but the medievals were able to enjoy more outdoor activities in the fairer weather. For them, though, summer was a particularly dangerous time because of disease and wildfires. A threat we're also all too aware of ourselves today because of the climate emergency.